almost don't want to do this one today. I read this last night in one sitting, and well, I'll give you my opinions in a second. But you've seen me recently doing those splatter Western books. I think it's a great concept, you know, taking the Western genre, making horror out of it, and then throwing a whole bunch of, like, you know, Fangoria or blood splatters and that kind of things into the genre. You know, it's almost like when you go to a fusion restaurant. Oh, who knew you could take two cultures and put them together and make a meal unique that you hadn't had before? Well, I think these splatter westerns are doing something similar, where they're taking the tried and true, take a Clint Eastwood, you know, but now take, you know, Sam Raimi's, you know, Army of Darkness and that kind of stuff and meld them together. It's gold. It really is gold, and I applaud them 100% for doing this kind of thing. You know, I tell the story I accidentally stumbled upon this genre, and I got a little bit hooked. So I've been going through and picking up here and there, one book here, one book there. They even came out with 4 comic books, and I read those. In fact, I even put a little review of those out here as well. But then I found out that I have a credit card that accrues reward points. And what I wasn't aware was that those points expire after a certain period of time. And I haven't used them in a long time. So I was able to find a way to link my card to Amazon. And I used my points and I bought all the rest of the splatter westerns. And they all came through so sporadically too. So I think I bought, you know, like 14 books, give or take, and they came to me in the mail over the course of like 4 days. And I would sometimes get 4 packages because they were coming from so many different distribution centers simultaneously. So, very odd. It was very entertaining to see, and I was checking things off my list as I went. But one thing happened as they were coming through is I had noticed that the thickness of some of these books were alarming. Like, look at this one right here. It's 95 pages long with a cover price of $11.99. So, you know, it just didn't seem like a fair price for that few words. And I've talked before about, there was one book, The Chisholm Trail, The Hunger on the Chisholm Trail, that had just misspellings throughout. And it kind of took me out of the story as I would stumble upon them. But then you kind of try to get past that and get back into the reading of the scene or the chapter and move along. And it was a good story. Keep that in mind. But you don't want to see that kind of thing. So I'm actually in the middle of reading 3 different books right now. I've got a large book of short stories, so I can pick that up and put that down over time. Reading another novel, which I'm enjoying very much. And the third one is one I'm actually recording on audio in my studio right here, which when I'm done, I'll post it on this channel. It's the next installment of the John Carter, Edgar Rice Burroughs book series. But I wanted to get to these. So when I saw this one, this is the smallest one on the list, 95 pages. I'm like, you know something? Wife's away tonight. Let the kids run around the house and play. I'm going to just sit on a couch and read this one and get through it. I did do that. And pretty quickly I realized I hated this book. I really and truly did. Now, I tried to make sure that I was putting to the side that whole, like, well, don't expect editing. But I stumbled across things pretty immediately. Like, even on page 3, there were instances where there was a missing space between words. And I thought it was like a new word, and I looked it up. Nope, it wasn't. It was just a missing space. Again, if it was written in, like, a word processor, it would have been underlined and shown, But then, as I went along, even on that same page, I was realizing that the sentence structure wasn't really making much sense. But I said, you know something? hold off on your thoughts, hold off on your judgment. Just let this go and see where it goes, because sometimes you might have a weird chapter and then it will get into the story in the next chapter. So it was like you got to gut through it, but don't worry, it makes sense later, kind of a thing. But that didn't happen here. Even for something as with a great title, they built a gallows for you and me. I was like, wow, okay, that itself has a bunch of potential. You know, kudos for coming up with a thought of that being the title. And it gives you you're on the gallows like in the first chapter. Or it's actually the prologue of the book. I was like, okay, there actually is one, and this is how this guy is into it, or how he's thinking about his ascent up the ladder, and you can feel the rope around his neck and everything else. But all the sentences are disjointed. They're coming very clipped, very staccato, and it's like, what is this guy doing with this? You know, I'm not following. And there are times that I can be a stupid man. So it's like, you know, okay, I'm not following, but everyone else in the world can be reading this like it's a, you know, a Sunday morning cartoon or a comic on a newspaper or something like that. But that type of writing didn't stop. And then it gets into chapter 1 and 2 and everything else. And it is all just the thoughts of the character being written down without stopping. I'm drawing a blank. It's like, oh, I know what it is. It's called Stream of Consciousness. I first came upon this concept when I was reading Ulysses by James Joyce. Huge book, also known as The Longest Day, because the entire book happens in one single day as you follow this one character, you know, through his endeavor. But there's 2 chapters in Ulysses that are complete stream of consciousness. And it's almost like following someone's dream. Now, dreams kind of like take one iota of the prior sentence and just goes off somewhere else. You know, it's like, oh, okay, I have to get up today and go to church. Church building has a steeple. You know, here is the church, here is the steeple. You do it with your hands, that little thing. It's got a cross. Jesus died for our sins. You know, I'd really like a couple donuts today because that's just sinful to eat. And, you know, donuts are very sweet, they're tasty, they're savory. I think I should go to a street fair one day and maybe win something in a carnival. It's like these thoughts. It's like you go boom, 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 boom. And while you can follow the thread of why they went from the first sentence to the second sentence to the third, when reading the whole thing together, it just doesn't make sense. And perhaps this thing does make sense. It just did not make sense to me. Now, overall, in these 95 pages, the story is extremely simple. So it's like it starts with a little gallows. I don't know if it's a metaphor or it actually happens. It's hard to tell even when you're done reading, or it was hard for me to tell. I gotta be fair, for me. And then it follows this family that are walking to a town, and they get to the town, and it turns out the father had bought a house from his brother's wife, I think it was, and they're both dead. And they enter it, and then the little girl goes out to play, and she plays with the general store owner's daughter, and brings her to like a small little lake, which she calls an ocean. And the daughter, Nancy, doesn't know how to swim, but she was told never to go beyond the trees. But the daughter of the man who came to town, her name is Jezebel, convinces her to go there, go to the water, and actually get into the water. Now, Nancy can't swim, but she's just like beholden to do whatever the other daughter, Jezebel, says. Let me give you an example of this, which is how the writing style was. So Nancy goes into the water, and she can't swim and she drowns. And Jezebel's just sitting off to the side, thinking. And these two paragraphs say this. If they had been older, it would have meant something more. Roads building the foundations of things they'd cry about in the mirror so many years later, wondering if what they had done to deserve the things in life handed to them. It's hard to even read. Wondering what it was they had done to deserve the things in life handed to them, like hot coals, only warm to melt flesh to bone. No more separation. No more separation. Now only the water can cool you. Now only submersion can cure you. Now only can you see the light shimmering and glimmering through the surface so far above you, so far out of reach. But hands will still reach out, fighting even after having made the decision to swim out themselves. Ourselves. Humanity drowning from the weight of our myths, our stories, holding us down below the surface. Though at least drowning wasn't a bloody affair. Though, what affairs were worth having that weren't bloody? Perhaps it is poetry. I mean, throughout the book, there are sections like this, as it's washed out and coming into focus, that looks like it is a poem. And it's done in that style where it's not like a pentameter where all the lines end in a word that rhymes in a sentence or two sentences later. It's just done with like a 3 words, continued with 2 words, continued with 1 word, continued with 5 words. And if you read it, you just read it straight. But some poets do this. In fact, I had heard a story not too long ago where there was this group that was like, they were like spamming and making fun of actual like poetry books, and they actually took nonsense things and put it in poetry format and actually got it published. Like, for instance, one guy took a piece of a technical manual of an engine, and they wrote it in that kind of format, and someone read it and they're like, oh wow, that's beautiful, and they posted it into like a book of short stories or a book of poetry. And it's like, okay, just because it looks like that washed out whatever thing, just because it looks like that does not make it poetry. And there's like 19 of these in the whole book, which makes the 95 pages go faster, which I couldn't have been happier to have the 95 pages go faster. Now, I'm the kind of person that when I start reading a book, I don't put it down. I will read it to the finish, no matter what. And I made sure I got to the finish of this in my one sitting, because I really didn't want to pick it up again. So it turned out that I had bought this book with reward points, so it didn't cost me an extra penny out of pocket, and it was still too expensive. But, like I said, I'm just a stupid white man, so there are people that can read this and find all the existential necessities of life in these pages, and it can mean the most to them. And I wouldn't even take that away from them. I mean, I would chide them in a conversation, but people are allowed to enjoy whatever they like to enjoy, so long as it doesn't infringe upon others. So, this is a splatter western. It's part of a series, but the books are not exactly sequential, and they don't all live in the same world. So a lot of them are like one-shots and done, and very infrequently does one book become like a sequel or a further adventure of another book. So hopefully this does not get revisited, and I do not want to see this author somewhere else doing this type of work. Oh, by the way, the entire story is literally family goes to town, one girl convinces another to drown themselves, and even the father knows the daughter's in trouble, goes to find the girl who's drowned, and she kind of like dissolves in the water. And then there's even a thing mentally of, did it even have a daughter to begin with? And then one by one, all the kids in the town are slowly dying. And they die violently. Of course, splatter Western. You got to get that blood splatter, that liquefaction of a body kind of aspect to it. And they're all going down. And eventually they think, oh, the new family, the woman must be a witch. Let's go after them. Let's, hang them and burn them and whatever else. The end. So there's like 1, 2, 3, 4 events. Come to town. Girl gets drowned. More of the kids die. They hang them. Done. Now there is something that makes you believe that this whole thing is cyclical. Like the opening prologue is the Gallows and the father's thoughts, stream of conscious thoughts. Then you have the whole book, and then it comes to an end, which is a repetition of the first. And it makes you think that this thing just keeps on going over and over and over again. And almost that they might be going from town to town to town. But that's left open for interpretation, which is more for a higher level course that you take to discuss. But for me, I'm done discussing this. Happy reading. Thanks for listening. I almost didn't even want to do this, but I got through it because I said I would review every book I read. Have a nice day.